End the Fed! 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 End the Fed!
Pictures of, at the Federal Reserve Bank, which is not a government institution. They have nothing to do with the federal government.
Humanity.
Every $100 bill which the Federal Reserve System prints and is sold to the United States at full face value represents a $100 loan. Even though the government pays for it, they still pay interest, and it becomes, that's what your $4 trillion debt is, are the Federal Reserve.
Paulson and Bernanke should resign. It's the first thing they should do. They should abolish the Federal Reserve and stay out of the way. Let the market take care of this.
Mr. Speaker, the Federal Reserve is the culprit. It has delivered this crisis to us. The Federal Reserve's low interest rate policy is a big mistake. It is not a panacea. Artificially low interest rates are achieved by inflating the money supply. Low interest rates penalize the thrifty, and those who save are cheated.
See, what the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 did was give this private banking cartel a total monopoly of printing money. So
the American government and the British government are propping up zombie banks.
A central bank setting interest rates is price fixing and is a form of central economic planning. Price fixing is a tool of socialists and destroys production.
And incidentally, it was Woodrow Wilson who first proclaimed the New World Order. It was the creation of the Federal Reserve that put the cap on this whole revolution, because that's what it was. It was a revolution that overthrew the traditional American system, the traditional government of the United States.
John Kennedy issued Executive Order 1110, which created U.S. notes to really competed with those of Morris, and there was a big hoopla about it. What can you expound upon on that? Well, U.S. notes were opposed to a backed by Congress. Congress had to push out the great funding to collateralize U.S. notes. And somewhat anachronistic law required that 2 to 3% of our price consideration be U.S. notes. That's since been repealed. So now as those war outposts and still to consideration, we're almost exclusively Federal Reserve. So that was part of a competing currency. That supplemented the Federal Reserve note. And I'm not sure to what the political motivation was to such a extent in the first place, but it continued
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
So what you had here was a complete takeover of the government of the United States by these private bankers. They've owned it ever since.
Aren't we reducing debts for Main Street instead of Wall Street? Isn't it time for fundamental change in our debt-based monetary system so we can free ourselves from the manipulation of by the Federal Reserve and the banks? Is this the United States Congress or the Board of Directors of Goldman Sachs?
What would be the first 2 things you would do if you were in Mr. Bernanke's seat tomorrow morning?
I would abolish the Federal Reserve and I would resign. Step 1 is abolish.
Pictures of, at the Federal Reserve Bank, which is not a government institution. They have nothing to do with the federal government.
The Congress, by conceding this authority, conveys extraordinary economic powers to the elite few.
The Federal Reserve really, even though it is not part of the federal government, it is more powerful than the federal government. It's more powerful than the President, the Congress, and the courts. The Federal Reserve determines what the average person's car payment is going to be, what their house payment is going to be, and whether they have a job or not. And I submit to you that that's total control.
This is a power that has been abused throughout history. Only the Federal Reserve can inflate the currency, creating new money and credit out of thin air, in secrecy, without oversight or supervision. Debasing a currency is counterfeiting. It steals value from every dollar earned or saved. It robs the people and makes them poorer. It is the enemy of the working person. Predictable events and suffering that results. Besides, the whole process is unconstitutional. There is no legal authority to operate such a monetary system. So that
in the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist.
it robs the people and makes them poorer. It is the enemy of the working person. Inflation is the most vicious and regressive of all forms of taxation. It transfers wealth from the middle class to the privileged rich.
Fed got us into this mess. It drives me crazy when I see Alan Greenspan on television talking about this 100-year flood. Like, the events that are taking place today are random, and they have nothing to do with his monetary policy. He blew up the bubble, and now it's burst.
He created the bubble.
Yes, and
he created the bubble with the easy money.
And why did we do that? We didn't want to suffer through the recession. We should have had, after the bursting of the dot-com bubble, after 9/11, we should have taken our lumps then. We wouldn't have this problem today.
The Federal Reserve really, even though it is not part of the federal government, it is more powerful than the federal government. It's more powerful than the President, the Congress, and the courts. The Federal Reserve determines what the average person's car payment is going to be, what their house payment is going to be, and whether they have a job or not. And I submit to you that that's total control.
Since the inception of the Federal Reserve back in 1913 under the reign of Woodrow Wilson, the value of the dollar has plummeted in terms of real value. The Federal Reserve was a wholesale gift to a group of elite people who profit every time the United States gets into trouble, and therefore one has to wonder if behind the scenes that the Federal Reserve encourages situations which causes the United States to get into debt. One has to wonder, every time there is a war, every time there is a disaster such as 9/11, every time there is an incident which causes the United States to spend money which it doesn't have, and that could be on social programs, whatever, the Federal Reserve benefits. They have a franchise which entitles them to a percentage of everything you own. I remember watching on YouTube where the courageous Ron Paul, a congressman from Texas, started to talk about the Federal Reserve, and all of a sudden his microphone was turned off. This is how much power they have, and this is why you must use Fax Zero, use email to let your elected officials know that you want the Federal Reserve nationalized. These are the people who caused the current situation with their policies of causing a balloon take place, and therefore these are the people who should ultimately not profit from our misery. Therefore, instead of taking over our lives, the working class, the honest and hard-working populace of the United States, instead of having them pay the bill for these fat cats who have immense power to destroy anybody that they want, including possibly John F. Kennedy, let's call for the nationalization of the Federal Reserve, which has nothing to do with the federal government. They are no more a federal entity than, let's say, FedEx. So send this around, get those emails and faxes through faxzero.com going to your elected officials and demand that the Federal Reserve is dealt with. Thank you.
The time has come. Let's end the Fed.